Good evening, Myers families, and thank you for joining us for our first 2020-2021 Parent PSSA information session. My hope is that you will learn more about the PSSA. You will learn more about how the PSSA is going to be administered this year, and that you will be knowledgeable enough to indicate your preference for your child either taking the assessment or opting out of the assessment. Ultimately, my largest goal is for you to be informed and for you to take that information and to complete the Cheltenham School District Survey, which I will share with you, which will be an indicator to the district and to myself as to how we can proceed with making sure that we have a safe testing environment for all students. With that, I'll begin. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Miss Dynasty and Miss Adams, can you see my screen? We can. So I'm going to start with some of the basics. If you are a parent that is already familiar with this information, please bear with me. I just want to make sure that we are all starting with the same foundational information, and I'm going to allocate as much time as I can to those questions. So my recommendation is that you write down those questions as you go, because they might be answered along the way. And if they are not, I will definitely answer those questions. Okay, let's get started. What is the PSSA? The PSSA is a state standardized assessment, which stands for the Pennsylvania State Standardized Assessment, which is issued to students in grades 3 through 8 across the state in the areas of reading, math, and science. I'll get more into detail about that in just a moment. As I said, it is an assessment given to students across the state to measure their understanding of grade level standards in reading, math, and science, with science being issued to 4th grade students only. So 3rd graders would take a PSSA for reading, a PSSA assessment for math, while 4th graders would take a PSSA state assessment for reading, math, and science. The test looks at how students are performing as it relates to those subject areas, measuring what they were supposed to learn for the entire school year for that grade. So for an example, for a 3rd grader, there are a set of Common Core Pennsylvania standards for math, reading, for math and reading that students will be taught throughout the year. The PSSA measures everything they were supposed to know for the year in math, everything they were supposed to know for the year in reading. It does the same for students in 4th grade for reading, math, and science. It is the same assessment that is issued to every student in the state of Pennsylvania relative to their grade. All 3rd graders get the same assessment, all 4th graders get the same assessment, so forth and so on. As students take this assessment, they are given a score indicating whether they performed at a distinguished level, an advanced level, a proficient level, a basic level, or below basic level in each of the subject areas that I outlined. As I said, it is a standardized assessment, and typically that assessment is used as a source of information for parents and educators to target the supports for the following year. There's a link in this presentation, which I will share, that parents can access in order to give them more information about this standardized assessment. Under normal circumstances, the PSSA would be one of the primary sources that teachers would use to inform instruction. Under normal circumstances, it will be a tool utilized by the state to measure the effectiveness of a school or a district. Under normal circumstances, the district might be used as a tool by the state to designate a school as focus or model or watch based upon the school or district's performance. Under normal circumstances, it will be utilized as a tool to measure funding allocations based upon student performance. Under normal circumstances, it might be used to track students into certain programs if they're in 4th grade transitioning into EP. Under normal circumstances, it might be used to qualify students for special programming and instructional initiatives at their school. You'll notice that I continue to say under normal circumstances. As you know, teaching and learning have been impacted greatly since March of last year. And while we have been resilient, you have been resilient, and our children have been resilient in continuing teaching and learning in various formats, we must all admit that this is not a normal circumstance. With that being said, you might ask the question, why is the Cheltenham School District testing? Well, let's talk about a couple things really quickly that are here. This is a mandated assessment by the governor. That's the first foremost. This is not from Dr. Marseille, and this is not from Dr. Smith. This is something that is mandated by Governor Wolf. Now, I'm sure that you know that Governor Wolf is aware of the impact that the pandemic has had on teaching, learning, families, and students since March of last year. And with that, I hope to clarify for you what the assessment consists of, what students can expect and what families can expect, and then what options parents have with that information to do what they feel like is in the best interest of their child. I'm going to pause there for a second, make sure I'm being clear. I'm going to just do a head check with Ms. Diamondstein, who I can see, and Ms. Adams, who I can see. How are we doing? Wonderful. Okay. So due to the pandemic, the assessment will not be utilized as it has under normal circumstances. It will not be used to allocate funding and determine schools' funding. It will not be used to measure a child's placement in the next grade. It will not be used to give schools and districts designations. It will not be used to classify or categorize students for future instructional purposes. It will be used simply for data for the state to track who took it, which is different because I am a strong advocate of the PSSA. And for those of you who are not familiar with the PSSA, it is a point of contention for some people in education, but I believe that under normal circumstances, it gives the students, it gives teachers a valid metric. But as I said earlier, we're not in normal circumstances. So it will not be utilized for in those capacities as it normally is. It won't affect our funding, it won't affect our designation, it won't affect your child's placement or tracking or instructional programming because the state, while they are mandating that we issue the assessment, they're also knowledgeable that we are in different times. With that being said, I want to talk about some of those different times, and I want to stop for 1 second and I want to talk about who is supposed to take the assessment. We've talked about it briefly and what you can expect your child to encounter. The PSSA assessment is a rather lengthy assessment. It is approximately 2 weeks. If you think about it holistically, we will be issuing it to 3rd and 8th graders. That means in Myers, it will be 3rd and 4th graders. Under normal circumstances, our 4th graders will have had the opportunity to be exposed to such an assessment the previous year. But last year, the PSSA, in all of its forms, reading, math, and science, was canceled across the state. So this will be a new experience for our 3rd and 4th graders this year. Testing usually consists of 3 days of reading assessments. Those assessments usually last about 3 hours each morning. So day 1 will last 3 hours for reading, day 2 will last approximately 3 hours, and day 3 will last approximately 3 hours, followed by makeup sessions for students that were unable to make it for a particular day. Students will then take 2 days of math assessments for approximately 3 hours each of those days. And students in 4th grade will additionally take 2 days of science assessments for approximately 3 hours each day. We understand as a teaching staff at Myers and across the Cheltenham School District that these circumstances have led to teachers teaching differently, to students being asked to learn differently, to us utilizing different tools and resources to engage students, and to teach according to a different schedule and format. All of those things impact the way students perform. For some students, they have taken very well to our hybrid learning model. For others, it has been a challenge. Nevertheless, the assessment is going to be the same assessment that is administered to all students. With that in mind, you can tell by the length of the assessment and how I described it that this assessment is one that requires a word that teachers use a lot, and that word is stamina. Probably every teacher on this call could have said that word at the same time, stamina. And for those of you who are athletes, stamina is the ability to continue to work at your best level over an extended period of time. We recognize that as children have had to engage in learning in various formats from March of last year to today, that stamina is something that might be a challenge for them. And we are working in order to build that stamina, but we are being knowledgeable and we're being realistic that stamina is something that we are paying close attention to. Ms. Diamondstein, Ms. Adams? Okay, got it. And when we talk about that, we said the virtual learning is different, different resources, limited peer-to-peer interaction, limited small group help in a traditional format. And to be honest, some of our children have been a little overwhelmed. And as their principal and someone who cares for them greatly, I am paying close attention to their hearts and minds each and every day, and being intentional about ways that we can support them, being very mindful of their temperaments, of their emotions, how they feel, that they feel loved, appreciated, and that they're not overwhelmed. And I know you as parents are doing the same thing. With that being said, as it says on the slide, all students in grades 3 through 8 will take the assessment in math, English, and 4th grade will take science as well. I know this sounds like a lot, but as I said, while the assessment is mandated, parents, you are the final say as it relates to your child. And you have options to have your child take the assessment or to opt out of the assessment. But before you endeavor to make such a decision, I want to talk to you a little bit about what it will be like for your child when they come into school. So first, it's important that you understand that the assessment can only be taken in the building. All students that take the assessment, whether they are currently remote or in person, will need to come into the building to take the assessment. Number two, the assessment, which is typically administered via paper and pencil, will be administered in a totally new format to teachers and students. It will be completely issued on the computer. Now, some of those things are minute to some of us who are tech savvy, but this is something that, as a principal for many years, engaging with the PSSA, that I'm paying close attention to as it relates to the administration of the assessment, the amount of angst or anxiety that it could give to a child who now has to write essays on the computer. And though we are all technologically savvy, we can all remember how we felt when we first started Google Classrooms, logging on to Google Meets, and all of those types of new endeavors technologically. And as I said earlier, I'm paying close attention to the hearts and minds of our students as it relates to what this assessment measures and the impact that it could have on them positively or perhaps in a negative way. If your child is currently a remote learner, meaning they are not learning in the building, as I said earlier, they will have to come into the building to take the assessment. Not a problem. I would love to see them, trust me. But there's some things that go along with that that I want you to be aware of as the parent of a remote learner, who I'm assuming you made that decision for a reason. Virtual students will come into the building and, where at all possible, will take the assessment by entering the classroom with their peers and being administered the assessment by their teacher. I said whenever possible because we will still be following the social distancing guidelines. And while I have some classes that have 11 at the currently, I have some classrooms that have 4, 5, or 6 and could accommodate more students. I understand that for some parents, this might be alarming because now we'll be introducing new people into their child's learning environment. And while we are still maintaining social distancing, mask wearing, and safety procedures of hand washing, it might be a point of angst for some parents. Additionally, there are some classrooms that cannot accommodate additional students. And unfortunately, at this time, it is worth noting that some students who will be testing that are remote at this time will be asked to come into the building to report directly to a testing area, such as the cafeteria or the gymnasium, and not encounter their teacher or their peers as they go through their testing, 2 weeks of testing. This is a point of concern for me as we again think about the hearts and minds of our students. It's not something that cannot be overcome, but in all transparency, it's something that might occur for some of our students that opt to take the assessment. Transportation for remote learners will be provided. With that being said, participation in the PSSA will directly inform, my numbers of participants will directly inform what happens with those students that were remote that came into the building to take the test after they take the assessment. Looking for head nods from Ms. Diamondstein and Ms. Adams. An example would be if Ms. Clipsham's class is already at capacity at 11 and a child that was remote came into the building and is testing in the cafeteria, that child would not have the ability to go into Ms. Clipsham's classroom after testing in order to remain and be engaged with the teacher and the peers, because that classroom is already at capacity for safe social distancing. I'm looking at Ms. Clipsham, Ms. Diamondstein, and Ms. Adams for head nods to make sure I was clear with that. We want to make sure that we do not add any burden to a child who is already feeling feelings that are difficult for them to navigate by putting them in a situation where they might feel further ostracized. And I'm choosing my words carefully because I don't want to try to sway any parent to opt out of the PSSA, but I also promised you all that I will be as transparent as possible as how I'm thinking about this assessment and its impact and its and what the actual execution of this assessment will be like for our children and our families. We talked about the testing environment. It will not be ideal. We said that they would have to come into the building, that they would be testing on the computer, and that unfortunately, students might not be able to test in their classroom with their teacher. I can promise you that third grade None of the students will be able to test in their classroom with their teacher because all of our third grade classrooms are at capacity. This is true for most of our fourth grade classrooms as well, which will create a very interesting dynamic and some strategic planning from Principal Lytle in order to make sure my babies are okay and that they are safe and that they are testing and not overwhelmed. Testing at home is not an option. I would love for that to be an option for our families, but it is not. Students that are remote that choose to come in will be provided lunch, and transportation via bus will be arranged for them. And a district issued Chromebook will be made available if they do not have one. The PSSA is scheduled to start on April 19th and continue into that first week of May, through the first week of May. Ms. Adams, Ms. Diamondstein, as relates to testing for reading, math, science, and makeups. So it's a quite lengthy experience. I think it's also worth noting, as we talk about the impact of testing on the hearts and minds of our children, that after testing, any of those remote students that came into the building to test will return to their learning registered format. If they were remote prior to the test, they will continue to be remote. And if they were in person prior to the assessment, they will continue to be in person. And once again, I'm trying to just lay everything out for you as clearly as possible. And then I'm going
That's
to—
a little confusing. Can you rephrase that? So do you mean for the day, or do you mean from that point after you came into school once? That doesn't mean that you've changed your registration.
Okay, so let's give an example. If I am John Johnson and I have been learning as a remote learner at home prior to the PSSA, I tune in every day on my Google Meet. I engage in my virtual assignments during the synchronous day, and I participate and complete my asynchronous assignments, and I am joining groups as my teacher prescribes for me as a virtual or remote learner. If my parents and I choose for me to take the PSSA, I will come into the building to take the PSSA each of the days during that 2-week window. After that 2-week window is up and I have completed testing, I will then return to being a remote learner as I was before the assessment. I'm hoping that I've given you enough information about the PSSA so that you are informed. It is very imperative that all 3rd and 4th grade families please complete the survey. I will put the survey link in the chat. The survey informs the central office of your intent to have your child take the state assessment or to opt out of the state assessment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to make sure that I put the link to the assessment to the survey in the chat. At this point, I'm going to stop recording, and I'm going to turn my attention to questions that parents might have as it relates to their child and the assessment.